Okay, today we're going to be talking about how to solve these quadratics using our graphing calculator. So we can still solve quadratics factoring using square roots, quadratic formula, and we can solve by graphing. So since we can solve by graphing, we can use some of the menus in our graphing calculator to find those specific points. So one thing we want to be able to do is find zeros in our calculator. So here's my x and y axis. And so our zeros, we know, are those x-intercepts. So our zeros are our x-intercepts or solutions. Sometimes they're called the roots of that quadratic equation. Okay, but it's where it crosses the x-axis. So zeros are the x-intercepts, sometimes called the roots. Sometimes it just says find the solutions too, okay? So that's one thing we're going to work on finding. The other value that we're going to find is, and it depends on if it's opening up or down, if it's a min or a max. But if my parabola is opening down, then I can find the maximum. Or if my parabola is opening up, then I can find the minimum in my calculator. And of course, both of these points are just finding the vertex points. Okay, here and here, that's just my vertex. Okay, but we need to know in our calculator minimum and maximum because that's what the options in our menu will be. So which one is it that we're trying to find? And we know that those values go back and relate to the vertex point of that graph. One thing that I want to point out here is that for both of these, it asks us to use left or right bounds, which is something we haven't had to use before. Same here, okay, left bound, right bound. So I'm going to just circle those step threes. I'm going to go to the bottom of the notes. I'm going to kind of talk about what left bound, right bound means. Okay, so if on my graph, that's the graph, X, Y. Okay, so we want to find zeros and our vertex point. Okay, now left bound, right bound, sorry, I didn't realize I wasn't right up there. Left bound, right bound is exactly what it thinks about. The left, what it sounds like, the left side of that point. So I'm putting boundary on the left, I'm putting boundary on the right. And what the calculator will do is it'll search between them. So we have to think about, okay, on our graph, here's the left and here's the right. And so with this point and this line's kind of going up, so it's a little tricky to think about left and right. Sometimes the easiest way to think about it is the horizontal axis on the x-axis. So if I were to go to the left of the point, I'd be getting these points up here. So if I wanted to do left bound, right bound on this point, right here would be left bound, and then over here would be right bound. And what I'm doing is I'm going to the left and then to the right of the x values of that point. And what it does is it searches between there and finds the zero that's between this bound and that boundary. And then for my vertex point, I could go over here. This would give me a left bound, and over here would give me a right bound. And we'll get some practice with this in the calculator in a moment. Okay, but I have to circle it going to the left, going to the right. And then what it does is it kind of searches between there and finds the minimum that's between those two boundaries. Now on this point, the left of this point, if I go this way, would be over here. This would be my left bound. This would be my right bound. So it doesn't always mean like above, below, right? So here on the point that's on the left side of my graph, I go above it and below it, and it'll search between. But on the right zero over here, I have to go below and then above to do left and right correctly. So what we're really doing is just going to the left of the point and the right of the point, but because it's not just a horizontal line, it's a curve, it can be a little confusing when students are looking at that. Okay, so we'll get more practice with that when we look at our actual graphs in a moment. So all I gave you was a table, and we're going to use our calculator here to find both the zeros and the minimum and maximum. So solutions or zeros of our graph. So let's just do the zeros first, okay? Start with this little step-by-step. So first it says enter the quadratic equation into y equals. Let me see if I can make my calculator a little better. So I go into y equals on my graph. I'm going to clear out what's in there. I'm going to enter in this first equation, 2x to square it. This little button right here, squared. Okay, so 2x squared plus 6x plus, and to enter in 1/2, we'll just do 1 divided by 2. Now, remember, our graphing functions are up here. I'm going to go into Zoom, and I'm just going to set it at my standard viewing window. But what we do need to use several times, probably, doing this is zoom in and zoom out. So just know if I hit zoom in or zoom out, we'll talk about that actually. Let's go to Zoom 6. There's my graph. Now, if I wanted to zoom in, just so that you know, I don't really need to here, but if I wanted to, and I hit zoom, and I hit option number 2 to zoom in, I then have to hit enter, and then it will zoom in. Okay, and same for zoom out. So I'm going to go back into Zoom, get my standard viewing window. Okay. So we may or may not need to adjust our zoom or our window a little bit to see our graph well, but I can see both my zeros and my vertex pointers on here. To get to both the 0 and the vertex, we're going to our calc menu, which is that little blue font up above trace. So I go second, calc, and I want to find the 0. So I go to option number 2. Now there's 2 solutions. There's a solution here and there's a solution there. I'll start with this one and see the left bound, right bound. So step 3 says surround the desired 0 using left and right bound. So I'm going to, here's my 0. If I go to the left of that point, that's going up here. And I hit enter, doesn't have to be exactly where I am as long as I'm to the left of this point. And then I want to be to then, now it says right bound, I want to be to the right of that point. You see the little arrows here? So it's saying I'm going from here to here where I clicked enter, and it's going to search between there. So I hit enter again, and it'll search and find the 0 on that side. So my first 0 rounding would be -2.9. Okay. Now let's do that again. So I go, so it says repeat the process for the other 0. So I go second, calc, on option number 2, which says 0. To get the other point, which is over here, the left of that point would be below it. So once I'm over, getting kind of close to it, but I'm on the left side of that point, horizontally going left here, left side of that point, I hit enter for the left bound, go above it, now I'm to the right side of that point, hit enter, and it'll search between where I put those 2 enters to find that 0, hit enter again, and there's my other 0, rounded, giving me -0.09 there for my zeros, okay? So now, so that's one thing we're going to work on doing, finding our zeros. While we have this function in here, let's go ahead and find our min and our max. We use the same menu, okay, but we're just selecting a different option. So we already have it entered into y equals. Now we're going to go second, calc, and we need to choose one or the other. So looking at this graph and knowing that it's an a value that's positive, so it opens up, that's what tells me that I should select minimum instead of maximum, because I have a minimum on this graph, not a maximum. So I go back into my calc menu and see min and max are right there. So because it's opening up and it's a minimum, I'll select 3. And then I need to do the same left bound, right bound thing, but this time around the bottom of the graph, where my vertex is. So I go to the left of my vertex and I hit enter. Go to the right of my vertex and I hit enter, and I hit enter again, and it finds my vertex point -1.5 for x value and -4 for y value, and that's where my minimum of my graph is, that point. Okay. So let's look. We're going to do a couple more together, and then I'll let you try a couple on your own with using the step-by-steps up above. So let's get out of graphing, I'm just going to go and hit y equals again. I'm going to clear this out. And I'm going to enter in my next quadratic. 2x squared plus 18x plus 42. Okay. Now let's see what happens here. So I can go to Zoom and adjust it if I want to, but right now it's set on standard. So I'm just going to go ahead and go to my graph and see what this looks like. So you'll notice on this graph, it opens up and it never crosses the x-axis. And we talked about that on our set of notes before this. So that means that this particular quadratic has no real solution. There's an imaginary solution. We're not there in getting that. So in terms of the zeros for this function, we would just say no real solution. Okay, because our graph doesn't cross the x-axis ever, there's no solution that we can find. But we can still find a minimum or maximum. And again, on this one, because it's opening up, the vertex is going to be the lowest point or the minimum. So I go second calc, and I'm just following my steps here. I know I need minimum, so I select 3. Now I got to find my little cursor. So by the way, you only want to go left, right here on these buttons. You don't want to go up, down. I think it will jump it out of your thing. So if I go, I can't see my little cursor. There it is. Okay, so I need to go to the left of my vertex point. I'm there now, so I hit enter. I need to go to the right of it, give it a boundary to search between, hit enter, and then hit enter again. And it will give me my vertex point at negative 4.5 and 1.5. Okay. Now let's go back into y equals. Let's look at our next quadratic. Clear this out. So entering this in, remember negative and subtraction are different buttons on your graphing calculator. We want the negative button that's down here. So I'm negative 1/2 x squared plus 7/2 x, and those fractions we're just putting in by using our division symbol. 7/2 x plus 4. I'm going to go to my graph. Okay. And I might want to zoom out for my vertex because my vertex is a little bit cut off here, but let's start with our zeros. So I have 2 solutions. I'm going to go second calc. I want to find my 0 or a0. So I'm over here. Right now, I'm not at the left. I'm at the right of that point. Again, think about the x-axis. I'm to the right. I'm going to be to the left, which means I'll be down here. So to the left of that point, enter. To the right of that point, enter, and then enter again. And my first 0 is -1. And then I want to get the 0 over here. So I just repeat the process. Second calc, option number 2, move my little cursor over and by the other 0. Here's the left bound. Go below it. There's the right bound. Hit enter. And my other 0 is 8. Now for this one, because it opens down, we want a maximum. I also want to be able to see it. Sometimes it gives you an error if it's not on the screen. So I'm going to go, so I can either go zoom out and hit enter, or in my window, I can just make y go up a little bit more. I change the y axis to go up to 12. Now I can see my vertex. Okay, so remember, window and zoom is where you can kind of adjust what you're seeing on your screen. I wanted to be able to see that maximum. So now when I go second calc, I don't want option 3 because it's not a minimum this time, it's a maximum. I want option 4. It'll ask me the same question, so left bound, enter. Go to the right side of that vertex, hit enter again. And there's my vertex point. Rounding 3.5, 10.125. Okay. So there are 2 more here that in a moment I'll give you a chance to do on your own. I was just thinking kind of another way to think about this. And my vertex is my parabola is a little, like I said, I have a bad habit of making it straighter than it's supposed to go at the end. Is in terms of left bound, right bound. If I go to the left, right, here's our left and here's our right. If I go to left of this point. Okay, that's to the left of that point. So I need to be above for left bound. Here's to the right on the x-axis of that point, brings me to the right bound, okay, which is below it. So if you can think about that x-axis and left and right on that horizontal line, that can help you find the left and right for your boundaries. So I'd like you to pause this, use the directions up above, and see if you can get your zeros and your vertex points for the last two problems. This one is a little bit off the screen, the vertex. You may want to zoom out, or if you set your Y max up to like 22, you'll be able to see your vertex point. Okay. So hopefully you tried those two on your own. If you haven't, pause now and do it. I'm just going to show you answers and talk about that last one a little bit. It's an interesting one. So on our fourth quadratic down, I get +1, -8. And my vertex point is up high. So like I said, you might have to adjust your window to get to that maximum, because it's going to be opening down. I adjusted my window so that Y went up to like 25 and I was able to see it. Now this one's a little bit unique, but the reason that it's showing up this way is because it's a perfect square trinomial, which means if I factored it, I would factor into the same parenthesis twice for that single parenthesis squared, which means I only have one solution, 3/2 or 1.5. And so when you look at your graph, your 0, you could do left bound, right bound on, and you get your 0. But notice your 0 is also your vertex point, right? That's also the minimum value of your graph. So no big deal. They're the same result here, that my single 1, 0 is 1.5, and the minimum of my graph is also that 0.150.